Hi, this discussion is focused still on the research protocol, but we would want to talk about the contents, form, style, and tips for qualitative research. Just as a disclaimer, again, there's no conflict of interest that I would like to declare, but I'm a nurse educator, and examples here are from APA and master's thesis of the presenter and other individuals whom are properly cited, and this is only intended as a guide for the learner's pursuit of research. Not intended to be your only guide because it's intended as a supplementary or a supplement to your textbook and advice of your respective teachers, advisees, and panel members. Now let's talk about qualitative research. Qualitative research. Introduction. The introduction of a qualitative research would focus on the following parts. Background, then you would have the epistemological, theoretical underpinning, the statement of the problem, the definition of terms, the significant, and then the delimitations or the scope and limitations of the study. Now, when we are talking about the background of a qualitative research, basically the background should be able to discuss why would we want to embark on a qualitative research. Some of the reasons there is that there's not enough evidence about this phenomenon, there is not enough literature about this phenomenon, these phenomenon have not been fully discovered or described. For that reason, we would want to embark on qualitative research. The same idea as that in the conduct of the quantitative research could be used in formulation of your qualitative proposal. However, it should be inclined also on the idea that there may be few literatures, there may be conflicting literatures, or there is a very interesting phenomenon. That's why qualitative research is said to be utilized. Okay? Now, you have the next part there, which is the epistemological and theoretical underpinning. If we're talking about qualitative research, one of the tenets or the idea behind your qualitative research is that there are different ways for us to find the truth, or there are different ways for us to describe the objectivity and then the reality that exists in our world. And this is what we refer to as the epistemological or the theoretical theoretical underpinning of our research. Now, if we are embarking on qualitative research, and in fact in any research endeavor, we need to understand these four things: epistemology, the theoretical underpinning and perspective, the methodology, and then the methods. Okay? In epistemology, although there are other epistemological bases that are developing worldwide and globally, okay, in this case, there are three main epistemological bases: objectivism, constructionism, and then subjectivism. This epistemological basis is grounded on the question, how is reality defined? How is reality described? How can we know about reality? That's epistemology. Okay? Basically, it's the study about knowledge, epistemology. Now, objectivism. Objectivism would tell us that reality could be objectified, or reality could be described, reality could be observed. Okay? That's why objectivism is the basic tenet or basis of your quantitative researches. Constructionism. When I talk about constructionism, it tells us that the reality is constructed in the minds of the individual observers. Okay, so it says that the reality is what is constructed in my being the observer of reality, or being the one experiencing the reality. It's my mind who's constructing what is reality. And then subjectivism. Okay, when I talk about subjectivism, it tells us that there is a subjective truth. What is real for one may be different from another. Okay, although to describe these three in detail, okay, try to go back to the literature about objectivism, constructionism, and subjectivism. Now, theoretical perspective. The constructionist point of view would have usually the interpretivist theoretical perspective. In other words, the idea that the reality is how one interprets it. Okay, that's the theoretical perspective. If you are making your proposal in qualitative research, you should be able to describe, no? You should be able to describe what is constructionism, and then what is your interpretivism. What do we mean by that according to references? And then In interpretivism, there are different types of methodology, example of which is symbolic interactionism, phenomenology, and then hermeneutics. And then under those methodologies, there are different types of methods, which are ethnography, grounded theory, phenomenology, narrative inquiry, action research, and historical research. Some of the students may be embarking on phenomenology. So if you are discussing the epistemological and theoretical underpinning, you should be able to discuss constructionism. What is constructionism? How is reality interpreted in constructionism? Then what is interpretivism? And then give us an overview of what is phenomenology. Okay, so you need to be able to discuss phenomenology. Now, there are two types of phenomenology, descriptive phenomenology and then interpretive phenomenology. Should be able to discuss if which of these two will you be embarking in your research. Okay, and then methods will be discussed later on in chapter 3. Okay, for example, if you will embark on grounded theory, so you'd still discuss constructionism, interpretivism, and then you try to look into hermeneutics and then grounded theory as part of your discussion. Okay, so these are the things that you need to include in your epistemological and theoretical underpinning. What's the purpose of that? If I'm the reader, I will know if from what interpretation of reality are you trying to anchor your research. You do not have here the theoretical framework already. You do not have the conceptual framework, but instead you would have the theoretical underpinning and then the epistemological basis of your research. The next part is the statement of the problem. So it's not like the quantitative research wherein you would have describe and then determine if there is a significant relationship, there's a significant difference. No, that's not how it's stated in quantitative research. So in qualitative research, you would state the study aims to explore the lived experiences of these individuals about this phenomenon. The core question will be, what is the lived experiences of the individuals in the management of their specific nursing units? Or what are the lived experiences of the participants? Okay, it comes to COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so statement of the problem. Now, the review of related literature, chapter 2. For the review of related literature, you need to be able to specify the specific subtopics that you will be looking into that are related to your phenomenon. Okay? Now, you might be wondering, will we be using qualitative researches as related references, or can I use quantitative researches as references? You can actually use both quantitative and qualitative researches. Basically, the review of related literature will be able to tell us what is known about the phenomenon that you are interested into, and would it justify the conduct of your qualitative research. Because if there's already a lot of description about the phenomenon that you are interested into, your qualitative research might not be the appropriate proposal or the appropriate methodology that we will be embarking on. Okay, so basically it's intended to answer the question, what is known about the phenomenon that I am interested with. Okay, now there's one thing that you need to be careful in the review of related literature when you're doing your qualitative research. You need to make sure later on that this idea will be bracketed. These idea are bracketed away from your interpretation of your current research. What do we mean by bracketing? Bracketing is the idea of separating what you know and what actually the respondents are telling you or your participants are telling you. Because you will have the tendency, if you know a lot about the topic, you will have the tendency to impose to your participant the answers that they might need to give to you during the interview. For example, if I know a lot about COVID-19, I tend to ask, are you stressed about COVID-19? Did you have difficulty of breathing about COVID-19? How did you cope with the difficulty in COVID-19? Whereas my participant might be talking about happiness in COVID-19, or whereas my participant maybe will be talking about the coping mechanisms that they had with COVID-19. But when I kept asking about questions, did you have difficulty? What are the challenges? I'm trying to make him focus on a certain area. Okay? I am not trying to let him or her describe, but instead I'm trying to give her ideas as to what to answer. Okay, that's what we refer to by bracketing. You should be able to separate. Okay, you should be able to separate, especially if you're talking about descriptive phenomenology. But if you are embarking on interpretive phenomenology, that will be a different case. Next, chapter 3, methodology. So methodology would be a bit different. Okay, it would be really a delineation from quantitative research. Now, the way your methodology would be constructed is like this: research design, methods, participants, data collection, ethical consideration, analysis, and then rigor and trustworthiness. Your rigor and trustworthiness will be equivalent to your validity and reliability of the research finding. It will be equivalent again to the validity and reliability. Rigor and trustworthiness is the validity and reliability component in quantitative research. Okay, that's it. Now, let's discuss them part by part. Okay, research design. So you need to discuss what particular qualitative research design are you embarking on? What particular methodology are you embarking on? So if it is phenomenology, you need to discuss phenomenology will be used in this study. This study will be conducted, okay, using descriptive phenomenology design. And you need to discuss what is phenomenology, why phenomenology of all the qualitative research there. Okay, then you need to mention constructivism, and then you need to mention interpretivism. Okay, because these are still part of your design. Okay, and then as I have mentioned, discuss the appropriateness of your research design. Okay, so you always go back to this table again as a guide. Next, the participants of the study. Just like your quantitative research, you should be able to discuss properly the inclusion and then the exclusion criteria for this research. Okay? When I say inclusion, who will be included in my study? When I say exclusion, who will not be included from my study? Now, inclusion. Okay, for example, the study subjects, okay, that should be participants included head nurses working in the nursing units. Okay, they should meet the following nursing criteria. One, employed at a private hospital. Second, head nurses from different nursing units. Third, with at least 6 months of experience. Fourth, able to describe their experiences. And fifth, they lived in Iloilo City. Sixth, has the ability to give informed consent. Okay? Now, this means that these are the people that I would want to approach for the conduct of my research. What is the purpose? Why are we having a very specific inclusion criteria? More particularly in qualitative research. It's to have the homogeneity of the participants. Okay, to ensure the homogeneity of the participants. Exclusion criteria. That would be the team leaders, supervisors, and chief nurses not acting as officer in charge of the top management. Okay? So, when I say exclusion criteria, who will not be included in your research? Okay? Your exclusion criteria should not be a restatement of your inclusion criteria. As an example now, for example, inclusion criteria here states employed at a private secondary hospital as a registered nurse. You do not say the following will be excluded: those who are not employed in private hospital. Or do not say the following will be excluded: public nurses. Okay, because you're studying private, you will exclude public. You do not restate your inclusion criteria to make it an exclusion criteria. You're just making it redundant. Okay, so think of other exclusion criteria that you need to. If there is no exclusion criteria, it's okay. A detailed inclusion criteria would already suffice. Next, research setting. Where will you conduct your research? And then take note, privacy. So, will you be conducting your research in an online platform interview? How will you conduct your research? Okay? So the study will take place in a private secondary hospital in Iloilo. Where particularly will you conduct the interview? So it should be conducted somewhere private, wherein somebody will not be listening to the interview. It's only you and the patient. And then you should be able to practice minimum standards as prescribed by the local government unit. Okay, that is if you're doing a face-to-face interview. But if you will be doing an interview online, you should also be able to detail that you are doing the interview online. What platform will you use? Okay, and where will you save the interview? Next, data collection procedures and strategy. So you need to discuss that the data included in in-depth interview. Okay, that's the method that we use, in-depth unstructured interview, especially in phenomenology. Then you do the field notes, meaning you take down notes, and then you do the audio taping or the video recording. But you need to inform the physician that you need to inform the participant, I mean, that you are recording the event. Okay, then next you need to ask for the letter of permission, and then you need to also to ask a letter from your, you need also to give a letter to your participant if ever they will allow you. And then depending on the type of design that you will be using, a return interview may be needed. Okay, a return interview is usually intended to have a detailed and in-depth description of the phenomenon being described. Okay, so you need to detail that. Okay, so if you're writing notes, you need to detail that. If you'll be recording using Google Meet, you need to detail that. Okay, just make sure that you will be able to say that the file is only accessible to the students. Okay, so as you can see, the interview was unstructured, focused on providing a full and rich description of the thoughts, feelings, concerns about their lived experiences. And then bracketing was employed. Discuss what is bracketing. Then ethical considerations, that would be the same as the ethical considerations that we had, okay, in your quantitative. Should be able to capture those ethical considerations that were mentioned. Okay, other than that, should be able to um, in data analysis for qualitative research, you need to be particular to look for a data analysis procedure that would be able to capture your intended methodology. In other words, for example, if you are embarking in phenomenology, you need to be able to identify whether it will be a descriptive phenomenology or will it be a interpretive phenomenology. Once you are sure that you are embarking on descriptive phenomenology, you can choose among the authors on descriptive phenomenology. For example, you may have Georgi, Kolaizi, Van Kam. And then if you are embarking on interpretive phenomenology, the other authors listed are on interpretive phenomenology. Now, in analysis, you need to detail. For example, you say that the data will be analyzed using Kolaizi's method in 1978. And then you need to explain and discuss the 7 steps of Kolaizi or the 8 steps of Kolaizi, depending on the version that you will be embarking on. So you need to look for the methodology for data analysis or the steps on data analysis as discussed by these authors. So these are the possible steps that you can do in analysis. Um, in the strict sense, there are a lot of ways for you to analyze your data in qualitative research. Various authors would have recommended different strategies on how to do the analysis, but these authors are your good starts. No? If ever you'll be able to see authors online that are in line with your epistemological, theoretical, and then methodological basis, just inform your respective advisors so that you will be guided accordingly. Again, the specific steps need to be detailed. Now, rigor and trustworthiness. One of the questions in qualitative research that we need to answer is that how sure are we that the data that you're collecting are rigorous, and how sure are we that the data that you're regulating is that you are collecting, I mean, is trustworthy. Okay? In other words, in quantitative research, we answer the question how to make it valid and how to make it reliable. In qualitative research, your focus is how to ensure the rigor and trustworthiness of the data. In other words, how sure are you that what he's telling you is really his experience and not derived from others? And how sure are you that this is the in-depth and rich description of the experiences that she's giving us or that he's giving us as a participant? To elaborate further and to understand what is rigor and trustworthiness, let us define it first. So when I say rigor, it is the quality or state of being very exact, careful, or with strict precision, or the quality of being thorough and accurate. In other words, if we are gathering the lived experiences of a certain individual, we need to be able to ensure that it is the exact experience. We are careful on the scrutiny of the experience, and it should be described in detail in such a way that we will be able to have a glimpse and we will be able to have an understanding, a precise understanding of what they are going through and what they've been through. Trustworthiness. It's the quality, it's the authenticity. The keyword is authenticity and truthfulness of the findings of qualitative research. In other words, how sure are we that the interpretation that you got is really the interpretation that the participants are trying to look into or trying to describe? How sure are we that this is the authentic description of the experience that they had? In other words, it relates to the degree of trust, confidence of the readers that they would have on the results. So that's how important rigor and trustworthiness is in your qualitative research. This is an example as to how you will be stating the rigor and trustworthiness of your research. So as you can see here, it states that when considering the aspects of collecting data and analysis that can create error, the researcher ensured rigor of the data collection. So it's both strict data collection process and analysis. It's reflected on the conformity of data analysis and interpretation. Now, the trustworthiness of data collected, the theme's transferability, as well as the data credibility. Trustworthiness is defined, and then this was ensured through a meaningful relationship with the participants that were developed through time. That's why in your data gathering procedure also, you need to detail that you conducted a preliminary interview before you did the formal, in-depth, and unstructured interview. The preliminary interview is actually intended for you to establish rapport to your participants. That's why it needs to be documented in your data collection procedure that you made an in-depth that you made a preliminary interview for the purpose of establishing rapport to your participants. Now, participants must also want to share information so that they can communicate their feelings, experiences, and insights without feeling pressured or wanting to censor what they share. The first phase of the data gathering will entail establishing rapport and informing them about the purpose of the objectives of the study. It's also imperative to build trust, caring, supportive atmosphere for the participants to feel secure. And gaining trust is necessary through the success of data collection process. To elaborate further, you can also discuss the following four um, ways to ensure rigor and trustworthiness. Okay, you have credibility. So to ensure credibility, what can you do? You need to have prolonged engagement. When I say prolonged engagement, you allow yourself as a researcher to be engaged with the participants in long period of time. In other words, you are not in a hurry. You are trying to establish rapport. You're trying to make each other comfortable during the interview. Next, peer debriefing. When I say peer debriefing, you should be able to debrief one another. You should be able to orient one another among you researchers that, hey, this will be your part. I will be the one to take down notes as you ask questions. I will be asking the first set of questions. You will be the one to ask the next set of questions. If ever another will not be able to ask a question, somebody from the group could take over. Okay, so that's your peer debriefing. Again, credibility could be ensured by prolonged engagement and peer debriefing. Part also of the peer debriefing is that you need to tell the researchers, fellow researchers, what are the yes and the don'ts in your interview. So for example, you're not supposed to give ideas to the participant as to what to answer. You're not supposed to be so emotional during the interview. Next, transferability. Transferability is defined actually as the possible transfer of the description of the participants to another population. The transferability could be answered by a thick description. Again, the word is thick description of the phenomenon under study. In other words, you do not allow, okay, for a simple, you do not allow for a haphazard description of the phenomenon. You would want the description of the phenomenon to be detailed. Next, dependability. Dependability is ensured through audit. Okay, audit. There's an audit trail that could be followed. And then confirmability through reflexivity. Okay, or reflexibility. So when I say reflexibility, that could be coupled by your journaling and then memoing. That would assist on confirmability. So again, under your rigor and trustworthiness in qualitative research, be able to discuss these four to ensure that you will be able to capture the idea of rigor and trustworthiness. Now, Chapter 4 is still analysis and discussion, but then it would not be focused on quantitative, no? Unlike in the quantitative research, wherein you will have the descriptive analysis and then the inferential analysis. In chapter 4, the discussion would be focused on the discussion of themes and sub-themes, and then the discussion of the major topics that were discussed during the interview with the participant. 5 is still on the summary of findings, conclusions, and recommendations. And then you'll have your references, and then that will be followed, of course, by your appendices. So there will be a discussion on the preliminary pages and then the appendixes or appendices. Thank you very much for your kind attention.